right, that was a quick intro.
That was a quick intro. That was
Oh,
actually
boy.
kind of cool.
Emergency meeting. Jens, thank you so much for coming. Oh,
I'm
so we still got
excited.
YouTube running. Is that you, Bob?
That was me.
Okay.
That was me on YouTube.
So,
Ooh.
folks, we're out of the norm here. We're here on a very special occasion. Number one, when Jens pings me, I drop whatever I'm doing. This is just how it works. And number two, the internet, Jens, Jens and the rest of the Atlassian community, the internet has been not quiet over the last couple of days.
No.
Over a change that Atlassian is going to be introducing here very well. We don't know when, but I would assume that it's on the roadmap and it's going to be soon.
I think they're still gathering input. I mean, this is basically A/B testing.
And seeing if there's chaos that instills.
Is which way does the tide go, right? Is it towards if you don't know what we're talking about, this controversy isn't price increases. No, we are talking about what really matters. The things that you work on in Jira, what should they really be called? They've traditionally been called issues, but Atlassian is proposing a change. And so we've got two sides of the issue.
Well, we have more than two. There's two that are prominent, but there's many sides to this argument. And so, Jens, why don't you give us a little bit of backstory? Why don't you walk us through what you did? Because when I first saw your post, I kind of ignored it.
Oh,
because I'm like,
so much for dropping everything when I contact you.
Well, let me tell you. No, let me tell you why I ignored it. Because we're in the Atlassian ecosystem, right? You got nice connections within the Atlassian, in the chains of Atlassian, right? Like everybody because you were there in the early days. And when I first saw that post, I was like, did he post that too soon? Because I hadn't seen anything. So I was just like, I'm of the idea that I don't like to be told what I can or can't talk about. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to wait until this becomes a little bit more public before I engage. And that's why I initially ignored it. But why don't you walk us through what you posted here on LinkedIn and kind of the effect that you've seen or the impact?
Yeah, first of all, I think it was already public because they posted on the community. And
yeah, no, I saw that later, but yeah.
Shared, so I didn't share any confidential information. For some background, Jira issues have been called Jira issues for
ever
20 years now.
Ever since the original one, right? Because
22 years, ever since it started off as a bug tracker, and issues made a lot of sense. And I think along the way it has evolved into like agile software development tool, into a tool that's used by a IT team. And I think lately Atlassian wants to push just more into other business teams as well. And it's been ongoing for a while. Now, the challenge that we've always faced when talking to other teams was explaining what Jira is and explaining what an issue is. And especially if you look at other languages as well, it becomes pretty apparent that issue is just a term that doesn't really apply equally in different languages. In German, for example, it's like a Vorfall. It's like an incident more. That's kind of the translation. Somebody then translated it into something different.
Don't get us wrong. Here in the US, issue is a bad thing. It has a negative connotation.
Is it? Right.
Yeah.
I just always knew it as something
positive. There's nothing positive in an issue.
Yeah. So one part of it is it was like a term that's somewhat baked in, but at the same time, it's also overwritten by project-specific issue types that you can have. Now, what we discovered in Jira Service Desk, and that's kind of the first time when Atlassian kind of ventured into a different audience to appeal to non-developers. And the one thing that becomes pretty apparent early on is that you lose people at the top of the funnel as soon as you don't speak their language. And for Service Desk, people are just used to request types. Like, we're getting requests in, we want to handle them. We don't get issues in. So when they had to set up Jira and they had to set up issue types, that just, okay, that's not what we want to do. That's not what we're looking for. And you kind of lose them. So as soon as the Service Desk team actually changed the name to request type there and changed it in an interface, it just appealed much more. It just became now a tool that actually was suitable for IT teams. And I think that now it's the same with non-software teams. Like how do you speak the language that kind of everyone understands? And I think that's the challenge, right? Do you want to pick a term that everybody understands, and ultimately you kind of override it on the project level anyway? So you give, like, you create issue types, whether it's like stories, epics, tasks, or
Yeah.
In like marketing, it probably would just be a task. It could be I don't know, like anything
But
like
we're not
like
talking
assets or something
about
else.
but we are not talking about just creating an issue type, but rather renaming, re-identifying an issue. It will no longer potentially be called an issue.
But so you call it an issue, but when you actually in there on a day-to-day, do you talk about the epic and the story and the tasks, or do you talk about issues?
So we in my world, right? We talk about stories, tasks, but they're always within the context of an issue, right? Like they're not. I was trying to explain this earlier because you told me in one of your posts, right, that you're like, well, you don't call it an epic issue, right? I'm like, true, I don't. But when we're talking, right, like when I'm engaging with my teams, I'll be like, well, let's look at the issues, and then we'll say like, okay, here's the stories, or here's the tasks, or here are the bugs, right? But like you still blend in issues naturally into the conversation.
Yeah, sometimes.
Because issues is just a collection of all of it, right?
Yeah.
It's not just an
Yeah.
epic or a story or task.
But is it because we're just like used to it for
I think
20
so, right?
years?
You got 20 years of you got 20 years of the same word. So
Yeah. So I think the thing to keep in mind, first of all, like what did Atlassian propose? So there was a blog in the community where it states, hey, we have the intention to rename issues to make Jira more applicable and appealing and easier to understand for users outside of the kind of technical context. So they are considering to rename the term issue into, like, I think work item was proposed.
Work item was one of them. Task was the
task
other one.
was the other one.
And they're actually so they're allowing you to make your judgments by first giving you a Google Chrome extension. And you apply this Google Chrome extension. You log into Jira, presumably Jira Cloud, and it will overwrite anytime the word issue appears. It will overwrite it with your choice, and you can choose. You can flip between the two, and then ultimately from that same Google Chrome extension, you can give feedback and say, yes, absolutely, let's call it a task, or work items rock. That sort of thing.
Yes, before we even get into the debate of this, you've seen the source code. Is issues hard coded? Like I feel like if they have the word issues in there, hard coded and not as a variable, there's going to be some chaos.
It's not a variable, yeah. It's hard coded for sure.
Right.
I mean, there's like different aspects to it, right? So you, like, on one hand, you do have the kind of the UI, like the interface part, and that's not hard coded because it's internationalized.
Right.
So they're already using different terms in different languages. From that perspective, to change that will be quite easy. But then you have other aspects of the product, automation.
Yeah, database tables and
JQL.
Yeah.
And like whether they change the database table, I doubt they will do that, because that is just, nobody gets exposed to it.
Yeah, that would be hard, right?
That would be really, really onerous and error prone.
But I think necessary. Like right now with the epics, I have a video that I made recently, right? When you go to import an epic and a story and you want them linked together, inside the issue importer, which would have to be renamed, right? You don't link to the parent field. You link to the epic link field, because under the hood, it's still using the old stuff, even though on the UI it doesn't. And that causes more confusion than anything else. Because essentially, if you don't know that little trick, you can't import your epics and your stories linked together.
Yeah.
So I can see a lot of problems coming down the pike here by changing it. And my vote would be just leave it alone.
But I think, and that's kind of, that's probably what you hear from a lot of people, and those people are the people who are already using Jira. But if the intention is to appeal to people outside of that existing community, then you do have to change something. And I think that's the part that's easily missed, and that's probably the flaw with voting as well, because you usually get people who already care and care about and use Jira. So you don't get the votes from the audience. This is why I was actually surprised, like that task came out on top.
So in your poll, let's be clear. In your poll, it came out on top.
And then our poll comes out, there, folks. we created a so I'm gonna pick up from where you left off, and this is probably how a little bit it got Alex's attention. Was I started seeing some other people look and comment about that very same community article. Some Atlassian community leaders and creators do that. So I decided that was going to be the top story for our TJL news break that we aired, that we dropped this past Monday, so yesterday. And in there, we also threw in, we also dropped our own little poll. I'd completely forgotten that you had your poll that had closed up, and so our poll is running right now. It's only been up about a week, and obviously both of our polls are completely non-scientific, right?
Statistically relevant though.
Probably
statistically significant. Anyway, so maybe like some context first before we get into the poll. So what was I saying? Oh yeah, so I talked to some people in the company, and just to get like a feeling, hey, is this a big deal? Like, is this like a ton of work? Like, because people
is this happening?
People are concerned. I think the thing that people are concerned about, and rightly so, is like, oh, you spend all this time on renaming the term issue. Meanwhile, there's like some other things I really want to get implemented, or
like
some
Jack,
other things I really care
like everything, the list of Jack items.
But that's a whole different story. We should have like a whole session about that at some stage. I'm just writing for a different podcast. I'm just writing a whole bunch of kind of thinking around that. But what I was affirmed, I think the engineering team thinks it's not as much work as you would think. And there's different phases to it as well. Like the first thing that you can do, and that's what they probably will start with, is to just phase out the word or like hide it more. And Atlassian started doing that early on because it used to say create issue at the top button.
Really?
Now it's just just says create. So, and there's more places where you can do that and hide that word a little bit more, which I think will help a lot. And then it's just a matter of like how deep do they go? Like, do they care about JQL, or is JQL not even applicable to that audience? So maybe it doesn't matter that it's core task. I would say I think you have to do it for JQL and keep that backwards compatibility. That seems to be important. I'm not sure if you have to change the API, for example. That's something that we did in Bitbucket when we renamed Stash to Bitbucket Cloud, and I wish we would have just kept it Stash because just a better name as well.
Somebody has probably been thinking about this a long time in JQL, because you can, in JQL, you could use as an operator, you can use type, and it would be the exact same thing as issue type.
Right. Okay.
Somebody made that. Somebody made that
distinction.
Maybe that's easier than you would think. Then, yeah.
Why even have the name? Just call it type.
Types. Yeah. So, but I wanted to know what do people think. So I put out a post on LinkedIn, like referencing the original post in the community, and then let people vote for 4 options. The LinkedIn only lets you vote for 4 options, which is unfortunate. The first option was item, because I think Atlassian suggested work item, and I really didn't like work item. So I was like, I added item. That kind of was my preference, that like my vote is on item actually in here. The second item here is work item. The third one is task. And the last one is let me pick a name per project, which like ultimately you can do anyway because you specify the project types. But like when you do that, like what does it look like?
551
in hindsight, the last option.
Reach.
Yeah, 551. Like it's
people care about
one that kind of exploded. Exactly. So Item was actually in the lead until about 100 votes. I was like, oh yeah, that's going well. That's going my way, the way I want it. And then Task started picking up, and obviously, like Task just obliterated every other
But let's
option.
talk about why you can't call it a task.
And I think I think now calling it a task in my mind is I'm not going to go with an Alex Ortiz fireable offense, but it's very, very polarizing to anybody that has been using Jira for a long time, because we already know that there is something already called a task, right? It's a type of issue, and it's usually usually there. Now we're saying that we're abstracting it not only to mean that one thing, but the entire category. And somehow that really just kind of gets at me.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from, because that's kind of where I started as well. I was like, we already have that term. Do we want to overload it? Item was my preferred choice until I read a few comments that rightly pointed out that it's pretty generic and probably clashes with other parts of the Atlassian ecosystem. For example, there's like a Confluence page and item, or in Jira more so assets, right? Like an asset is probably more of an item than something else. So it's like, oh yeah, that really is probably more confusing than anything else. Work item is probably better, but that's just like a mouthful. And do we really want that?
I'm okay with work item because I'm used to that, in that they were in tools that I was using and administering before Jira. Work item is the common term for IBM Rational ClearQuest, and they brought it over into Rational Team Concert as well. So coming from that IBM world, very used to it, to those things being called work items.
And don't forget TFS as well, which we don't mention.
I think just the audience that Atlassian wants to bring in doesn't come from those tools, so they won't.
So
be...
it's probably interesting to see what is it called in Asana, or what is it called?
It's a task. It's what it is, right? That's essentially why they're doing it, right? Like that's what you call them there. That's what is universally acceptable. But this is where we start entering. Like, is then Agile dead then?
Well, that's being just like clickbaity, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I think so. I think that's like the.
I don't honestly. No, wait. Look, Jira today has a structure that is very pro-agile. The moment you start enabling teams to rename your epic to be whatever you want it to be, right? You start changing the structure.
And I've heard arguments from the Agilistas that say that if you're using Jira, you're killing Agile. So potato.
Yeah. So
fine, within the context of Jira, is Atlassian then moving away from being an Agile-based tool and just being a work-based tool?
I think it's always been a work-based tool. Right? But it didn't even start off as an Agile-based tool.
There's too much Agile structure for it to be a work-based tool.
So I think I agree with that. But if you just provide options for people to work in different ways, it doesn't really mean that you move away.
Yeah, but that's why you have your Jira work management. That's why you have your JPDs. That's why you have other tools that can be for the non-techies.
But it was just
why mess with Jira?
But whether you have was it really a different tool? It was a different project that looked completely different, and people wanted the features that you had in kind of one tool in the other tool as well. So that was the biggest challenge with that. You have a table that's different to the table. Well, first of all, it didn't have a table. Now we have a table.
Yeah, but now they're closer to parity. So why kill off work management? Why not just leave work management be? And over there, you can call it whatever the heck you want, because over there is no epic or a story.
I think the question was just why is it a different tool? Why is it not just the ability to enable certain features and configure your project in a way that that kind of works for that style of working, which is basically what it was before. It's not
chaos.
And what chaos? Like it's basically the same. If you
guardrail.
go in and say, I want to create like an agile project or like Scrum or Sprint, like nothing changes for you. If you really want, you can go and rename then the epic. Like that's what a lot of people are asking for. They want a more flexible hierarchy, not limited to epics and stories and tasks, right? But if you set that up by default and you get that default setup out of the box, nothing changes for you from what's today.
Right now,
if you pick a different, even with a change, let's say Atlassian changes it to task. If you go in, you're never going to see that word task. Like only if you go into the settings and then say, I want to change the task types, which I had a beautiful mock-up in my.
Except the conversation will change, though, right? Because in expressing your tasks, you'll just refer to everything as a task, right?
But coming back to my point from the LinkedIn post, do you refer to everything at the moment as an issue?
Yes.
No, you don't. You call it like, hey, the epics, this is an epic. Like when you broadly hit like the issues, or probably ticket is like something that people, which is not in that list, I wish it was, 16 people commented and said, hey, why don't we call it ticket?
I would call it a ticket. I would call it anything but a task. That's all I can tell you.
I would say that the unofficial poll, and I think Andrea has it right, is most people when they're not even aware that they're called issues, they call them tickets.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say tickets or tasks would be the two most common things that I hear when somebody's new into Jira. I think still like so I spend a lot of time teaching people how to use Jira, right? The number of times that I have to go describe to somebody, because they all go through certified Scrum Master training, right? Almost everybody goes through some sort of Agile training to figure out what Agile is, and then they're like, here's the tool in which we're going to enable that, right? And so that your Agile training has your epics, your user stories, and then a task, and that hierarchical level. And Jira has always caused so many problems when I'm describing. You have a user story and you have a task, and every user wants to use the task as the subtask or as the behavior of the subtask, which is naturally nested under the user story, right? And so this is where I'm like, just muddying the waters by overloading that task is just going to cause a little bit more headaches, and it's going to solve problems.
Yeah, I just feel like, but it's like everything is like something that needs to be done.
Right, but we have so many other words like tickets and items and work items.
Well, but you gotta think about like which words do you have to explain the most? Like item, you would have to explain the most. It's the same as entity. It's kind of like a database, very technical still. It's like when somebody comes in new and they see the word task, they probably understand a ticket. Maybe they understand it, but it's already like a little bit more removed from like what the actual meaning is there. Like what is meeting? Somebody had like a negative association with ticket, where it's like, oh, is that like I get a ticket for parking in the wrong spot or something?
I know, right?
Yeah, maybe. Like, I'm not sure if it's.
I mean, if we're just looking at it at face value, right? If we're ignoring any concept of principles or frameworks or anything like that, and we're just looking at a task tracker, this is what it is, right? It becomes a task tracker. But now we're entering dangerous territory. Just humor me for a second, right? Because now we're entering territory of like your Airtables. We're entering territory of your Monday.coms, right? And we're really entering more of what those basic task trackers are. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
But yeah, let's face it. Like Monday.com wants to enter the territory of Jira. They have like a software development suite as well.
Yeah, but they all do it in a very crappy way, and Jira's still king.
They do it in a crappy way. So
you're killing them.
But this is like, if you think about Atlassian, like first of all, you want to expand your market, but you also want to defend where you are. Like let's say like Monday.com does a much better job in like 5 years with kind of the development aspect, and then there's a question like, oh, which tool should we consolidate on? It's like, well, like Monday.com, they do a good job with the average business users, but also a decent job with like software developers. Maybe we'll just go with that. So for Atlassian, really the kind of only option and like a great way to expand the market is to say like, how do we grab
Yeah, how do
more
you
of
appeal to
that
the
market as
general?
well, right?
Yeah.
Right. You've already locked in development
That's right.
more or less.
But that's where the problem is in that, right? That's where you're gonna have the hate, or maybe not the hate, but the resistance from the people that are locked in.
But if you can execute in a way where you change as little as possible for those people, and let's face it, on
Absolutely.
the day
Just
to
don't
day,
call it a
like
task.
nothing will change for them, right? Yeah.
Just don't call it a task. I call it anything else, and you
Yeah.
got my vote. Just don't call it a task.
Yeah, we'll see what they end up with. But I think like in the end, like whether they call it task, work item, or ticket, like it won't matter, because the idea is to kind of put that term away into the admin and into like advanced functionality that people who use it will understand it anyway. Like it's for the end users who don't have to see that the terminology or get confused by it. And again, like I don't think it's as much of a big deal as you think in terms of like overloading, because task is just such a generic term.
But
I do agree with the people get confused about story and task on the same level. So which one should I use, especially with stories being like not like, do people still write user stories? I don't think that's like a thing anymore. It's definitely starting to be less.
And what I did notice, what is very interesting, I've been using the work breakdown structure for AI. I love that feature. And I noticed that even though I've already created a story as a child of an epic, it's defaulting to creating the task issue type.
Right.
But what's even more interesting though is that by default out of the box, Jira doesn't allow you to estimate or put story points on a task.
Is that right? Yeah. I don't know.
It's only epics and stories.
It's only epics and stories.
Yeah, I think like that's really something that needs to be changed as part of like the effort to become more flexible.
Yeah.
Like I think like a few years back, there was a bunch of us like advocating for just making them all super generic and just naming them differently. There was a comment somewhere as well, like why is the functionality available on subtasks different to the ones on task or stories and different to epics? Like they don't really have to be there. It just needs to be a parent-child relationship between those, and they could all be the same thing. Now there's like I think there's something to be said about like epics being special in some way in terms of roll-up and how you visualize them. So there's certainly something there, but maybe there's a different way to do that as well.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see who at Atlassian has the job to like figure out what the competitors are doing, like testing and using like Monday and stuff. Because like I've been for the last week just knee deep into Airtable and just seeing what Airtable can do, and I'm like, I don't even know why I will need Jira anymore in the long term. I'm just gonna go to Airtable.
Well, I've seen people managing roadmaps in Airtable, and I can tell you it's a disaster. So
but that's what I'm afraid that Jira will eventually become.
But I don't see why, like
because you're basically trying to compete. You're changing the DNA. The end user won't see it, but deep down that molecular level, you're changing it.
This is almost like a ship of Theseus type of question. I mean, you start removing planks and replacing the ship. How much of at some point, how much of the original ship remains?
Well, I see it more. I don't think the planks are being removed.
You just got rid of issue. That's the big.
We're just adding a bigger motor to the ship. That's kind of how
no. You're swapping out a critical component. The word issue.
I mean, that plank was broken clearly, so rotten. We needed to replace it with like a nice.
But it was a call that was made, even if it was a crappy call. But it's still a call that was made. Issue. The word issue, even if the end user doesn't see it, under the hood, it is so interweaved into everything.
But it's not about the cells; it's about the soul of the product. And Sarah is asking a question, right?
I mean, I do see one major change, and that is our co-host Rodney on his Jira Guy blog. He's going to have to create a new tagline. And I'm sure that's going to affect all of his merchandising. All of those shirts, he's going to have to like go in with crayon and completely swap
that's
out
going to be issues. The one that we write issues and we have the cross out and it says task on top.
There we go. I think that's a seller right there.
The good thing is, like, I don't think he like has a massive inventory of stock there. Otherwise, you can like sell it off now. But that's a big opportunity to sell more merchandise, updated merchandise. So
I know, Ronnie. What we gotta do is we gotta get out there and start making the task shirts.
That's right.
Or have you updated your Jira work items today?
Or you just make the forever issues shirt.
Yeah. So this one is like issue. I'm old fashioned. See, yeah. Work item still winning. We'll see.
I'm telling you, as long as they don't call it task, I don't care. Like, I mean, I do care, but as long as it's not task, they can't call it task. So call up your homies at Atlassian and tell them not task.
I know there's like some preference for task, but it's very divided, even at Atlassian, from what I hear. So there's the opinions go far apart.
Well, Jens, I know we were having a good time here. I want to be mindful of your time, and we just hit the 30-minute mark. We're starting to bleed into Jira duty. So, with that said, I think we're going to change over to another room and to a different live stream. And so, Jens, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Jens.
And being a part of this. Thank you again. It's always very inspirational and powerful to hear from an early Atlassian, right? To really understand, because you are providing different perspectives than the ones that Bob and I usually have. So I think it was good.
Yeah.
So we'll have to come back and we'll have to come back and talk about those jacks though.
Yeah, and especially
see what happens when the dust finally settles and see what Atlassian says.
Exactly. Yeah. But I'll come on and talk about Jack in my opinion. I'm just writing that all up. It's
all right, folks. Well, make sure you go check out Released. I know this is definitely not sponsored, but Jens is always in good faith, right? Make sure you go check out Released on the Atlassian Marketplace. I know you have your release notes, but is your roadmap now live? Is that a separate app?
Yeah. Roadmap is live. It's in the same app. It's all about
the same app. Okay.
Yeah, it's all about customer communication. That's what we're focusing on.
Yeah, so give him a try and go show some love and support for Jens over here. And thank you so much, Jens. And one day I will get your last name, so I'm intentionally avoiding it because I just locked in Jens. just got that part.
When I think of Jens and his last name, I automatically, I don't know why, I think F1.
Well, that's the only association.
Yes.
Michael Schumacher is just a legend.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that's what most people. I went like last story. I went to a hostel in Vietnam, and it's like, oh, are you related to Michael Schumacher? I was like, would I stay in this hostel if I was related to Michael Schumacher?
How much would you charge me if I said I was?
I know. Exactly.
I got autographs in my backpack if you can get 50% off.
That's right. Yeah.
All right, Jens,
everybody knows him. All right, thanks everyone.
Thank you, y'all. We're gonna end this one here, and then we're gonna jump over to APEC to do some Jira duties.
Yep.
Thank you all.
See you next time. Bye.
Bye.